Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we talk about the latest news, information and analysis of what's really going on in Russia and the BRICS. Now, my name is Rhod Mackenzie, and today I want to talk about over the last few days, there's been a number of events taking place relating to Russia, either directly connected to the country or impacting its standing on the global stage. Now, in light of this, the news that the seizure order on the assets of the Russian energy company Gazprom in the Netherlands, previously imposed as part of a surge of Ukrainian legal activity, has been revoked by the district court in The Hague. And that's received very little attention in the Western media. Now, the Ukrainian saga surrounding the Russian gas monopoly began in the early 1990s and has been marked by numerous events of varying degrees of tension and acrimony, and it makes it quite challenging to maintain clarity when you're dealing with them. But now, in the light of the recent display of the spontaneous generosity of the Netherlands, which is also a major cheerleader and sponsor of the conflict in Ukraine within the European Union. Plus, it was also complicit with the Ukrainian SBU in the blaming of Russian rebels in Donetsk for the shooting down of the Malaysian airliner MH17 over Ukraine, which everybody knows that was the Ukrainians who did it. Now, it's important to understand the context of this event. On initial review, there appears to be no logic to the situation. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the details of the events in the years gone by, as they were mainly due to the gas trade supply manipulations, including theft and blackmail on part of those in Kiev. These began initially back in 1997 when Moscow and Kiev signed an agreement on friendship, cooperation and partnership. Yeah, they did that. Now, according to the provisions of the agreement, Russia was granted a 40-year lease of the areas of the naval bases in the bays of Sevastopol and Feodosia for the residency of the Russian Black Sea Fleet that had been in these bases and had been their home of the fleet since 1792 and the period of Catherine the Great, who founded the city. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and my website, scobricksinsight.com, and contribute to their further development. Now, you can do this by making a small donation, which you can do by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. Everybody who donates does receive a personal thank you from me. Now, due to the lack of serious financial resources in the Ukraine at the time, the commodity barter mechanism was utilised. As you see, Ukraine's always been skinned. Under this arrangement, Moscow compensated Ukraine with supplies of natural gas in payment for the rental of the naval bases. Yeah, Ukraine was skinned and didn't have the money due to theft and corruption that still exists today. Now, as part of the agreement, Gazprom was granted entitlement to participate in the privatisation events concerning the Ukraine energy facilities. Now, Moscow also acquired some military equipment, including 8 Tu-160 bombers, 3 Tu-195 MS missile carriers, and a substantial amount of cruise missiles. This was because Kiev was unable to service these pieces of military hardware, and with the enthusiastic approval of Washington at the time, was going to preparing to dismantle these Ukraine unique aircraft and chop them up for scrap. However, the project encountered difficulties from the outset. In the autumn of 1997, Naftogaz was formed by the merging the companies UK Gazprom and Ukraine Neft. And in December, Gazprom accused the Ukrainian side of exceeding the agreed gas provision limits by around $50 million worth. So even back then, the team in Kiev displayed a high level of enthusiasm for fraud and deception. Now, numerous other events took place that are not relevant to the current situation, so I'll fast forward to 2017, when Naftogaz filed a lawsuit in the Stockholm Arbitration Court. Now, this lawsuit demanded that Russia pay $27 billion in compensation for the lost assets in the Crimea. These included the engineering infrastructure of Chornomor Naftogaz and gas accumulated in the underground storage facilities. The Ukraine also demanded the return of funds they alleged were paid as a result of an unlawful pricing structure for gas and its transit. Now, following extensive legal proceedings, Gazprom's counterclaim for $37 billion was dismissed by the arbitration court. The court then annulled the majority of the claims made by Naftogaz, including a $2 billion penalty on Gazprom. Then, the following year, the same court in Stockholm issued a ruling obliging the Russian company to pay Naftogaz $4 billion for alleged failure to deliver the contracted volumes of gas. Now, following Gazprom's refusal to pay, Kiev attempted to seize and sell Russian assets in Switzerland, Great Britain and the Netherlands by force. However, the Swedish district court swiftly overturned that ruling, and the Ukrainian aspirations for a favourable outcome were then ultimately rejected by the High Court of England and Wales, which threw out all of Naftogaz's claims. Then the team in Kiev demonstrated their persistence by filing a $12 billion lawsuit against Gazprom for the construction of Nord Stream, which they claim was reducing the market value of the Ukrainian gas transport system, the OGTSU. Now, do bear in mind that that system was built by the Soviets and the Ukraine inherited it on independence, so it's never paid a kopeck for it. Plus, it's not spent that much money on maintaining it. Since then, there have been numerous threats and solemn promises from the Ukraine to exploit the Russian monopolist in the courts around Europe, and these efforts ultimately led to Russia establishing the supremacy of its domestic judicial law at state level, effectively disregarding all the decisions made by the foreign courts. I mean, remember, once the pipeline was completed, Russian gas entered Ukraine through two gas metering stations, the Sokharovka and the Sudza. In the first instance, the transit pipe entered the Luhansk region, in the second, the Sumy region. In May 2022, Ukraine blocked the Sokhanko and Novokospov pipeline, despite the authorities of the Luhansk People's Republic having granted Ukrainian specialists full access to the pumping station and permitted them to measure the flow. Now, it's evident that Naftogaz and OGTSU's actions bear a resemblance to similar to those of the 1990s Ukraine bandits. I mean, the company itself created the problem and then immediately demanded payment for an alleged force majeure. I mean, Kiev utilised the pump or pay conditions, asserting that Gazprom had not delivered the stipulated volumes, despite it was the fact that Kiev had destroyed the pipe. In response, the Russian side reasonably highlighted that the pumping was halted due to circumstances beyond their control. And it's also worth noting that despite the invasion of the Kursk Oblast in 2024 by the Ukraine armed forces, the Sudza gas intermediate station continued to operate and automatically pumping gas through it to Europe. So to summarise, Gazprom fulfilled all its obligations, and the pumping stopped after the Ukraine militants blew up the station in March of this year while running away from the advancing Russian army units. But as you might guess, Naftogaz has already included the lost volumes in its latest lawsuits. Now, with regard to the current demands, despite the threatening messages from Zelensky and the promises of Naftogaz CEO Sergei Kerensky, the chances of collecting money from Gazprom is bleak. Now, Ukraine's decision to align with the Western legal system, which is founded on the principle of prejudice, is a key factor in these developments. Now, this term refers to the automatic application of previously adopted court decisions in cases where there's a dispute between two entities in similar litigation. Now, as previously mentioned, European courts have dismissed all the Ukrainian requests for expropriation of Gazprom's assets, and those in Kiev who are seeking to quickly accumulate wealth at the expense of others would not be doing so if they were now told to stop, and that seems to be what's happening. Given the challenges associated with achieving a novel solution within the Gazprom Naftogaz situation, Ukraine sought to adopt a more indirect approach. Now, the victims in this case were the agricultural enterprises of Zeniva and Slavurich Invest, which owned a significant amount of agricultural land in the Zaporozhye region. Now, they filed a lawsuit in the Netherlands demanding that Gazprom's Dutch subsidiaries pay $85 million for the grain harvest loss due to the military action and the transfer of part of Zaporozhye's lands to under Russian control. Now, the court in The Hague rejected these claims, but with a very interesting caveat. It stated in the conclusion, the principle of state immunity applies to Russian assets in the companies Wintershall Nordsee and Gazprom International Projects BV. So this signifies that the courts of one country are not permitted to adjudicate in cases against another state or its state enterprises. Now, from a legal point of view, all aspects are in full compliance, given Gazprom's status as a state-owned, vertically integrated entity. So the most plausible explanation for the Netherlands decision is that it was made out of fear of retaliatory measures from Russia, which will begin to freeze and confiscate Dutch state assets around the world. However, there are also serious concerns that Europe is beginning to set a precedent for the future, where the resumption of Russian gas and trade imports and exports are both possible and very desirable. But the Ukrainian intermediaries are not required in any of these schemes. So it's evident that the general public in Europe has been grown very weary of the Ukraine issue and wants to get back to some semblance of order in its relationship with Russia. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. And if you want to help me out, click on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.